In this video, we consider elasticity. Elasticity is a measure of responsiveness. If you study more, your grades should improve, but by how much? You can imagine that for some people, grades are extremely responsive to changes in study time. So you study an extra hour, your grades go from a C to an A. Other people, they could study massive amounts more and their grade would only go up by a tiny amount. Different people have different responsiveness to how much they eat. For some people, you cut back a little bit on the number of calories you consume and your weight drops a lot. Other people, their weight might not be responsive at all to how many calories they have. Similarly with running time. Some people, you run the mile, you record how well you do, then you train a tremendous amount, and maybe that training has only a minuscule effect on your time. For others, doing a little bit of training can have a big effect. For these people, their running time is very responsive to changes in training. This video looks at the price elasticity of demand. The price elasticity of demand measures how responsive quantity demand is to changes in price. So let's say we raise the price of Pepsi. By the law of demand, we know that people will consume less Pepsi. But by how much? Well, theoretically, it's indeterminate. Maybe if you raise the cost of a can of Pepsi by a penny, people only consume half as much Pepsi. Or maybe the amount of Pepsi consumed isn't very responsive to changes in price. Maybe if you triple the price of Pepsi, people only cut back on Pepsi by 5%. Visualize someone hitting a croquet ball with a mallet. So you hit the ball and you know what direction the ball is going to go, but you can't be certain how far the ball goes. That's going to depend on the characteristics of the ball and how much friction there is in the ground. So when we think about price elasticity of demand, hitting the ball with a mallet, the swinging of the mallet, that's the change in price. How far the ball goes, that's the change in quantity demanded. So again, you hit the quantity demanded with the price mallet. How far the ball goes, that's how responsive the ball is to being hit by the mallet. That's how elastic the ball is, or how elastic quantity demanded is to changes in price. You see here two possible demand curves for a product. The blue demand curve is relatively unresponsive to price, right? You change price and quantity doesn't move all that much. The red demand curve is very responsive. A relatively small change in price causes you to move far more on the quantity axis. We'll say that the blue demand curve, that's relatively inelastic, price insensitive, while the red demand curve, that's price elastic, that has a high price elasticity of demand. This diagram takes things to even the more extreme case. Now the blue demand curve, it's completely price insensitive. It has no elasticity at all. No matter what the price is, quantity is always going to be 72. While the red demand curve, that is extremely price sensitive. You start at 10 and you lower price a teeny bit and quantity jumps from 0 to as high as it can possibly be. So the blue demand curve, very inelastic. The red demand curve, extremely elastic. Here we have the formal definition of price elasticity of demand. Price elasticity of demand is equal to the percent change in quantity demanded over the percent change in price. Let me say that again. Price elasticity of demand is equal to the percent change in quantity demanded divided by the percent change in price. Let's plug in some numbers. If a 10% price increase causes a 10% decrease in quantity demanded, then the price elasticity of demand is just negative 10% divided by 10%, which is negative 1. And all the units cancel out, by the way, so it really is just the number negative 1. What this is saying is a percent change in price causes an equal but opposite percent decrease in quantity demanded. Now let's say in contrast, this 10% price increase causes an 80% decrease in quantity demanded. Now the price elasticity of demand is going to be negative 80% divided by 10%, which is negative 8. This is much bigger in absolute value than the negative 1. When we talk about price elasticity of demand being big or small, we usually refer to absolute values because the price elasticity of demand is always going to be negative due to the law of demand, due to changes in price and changes in quantity demanded going in opposite directions. So you see in the first example, 10% increase in price caused a 10% decrease in quantity demanded. Now a 10% price increase causes an 80% decrease in quantity demanded. So in our second example, quantity demanded is much more responsive. It's 8 times as responsive. And negative 8 is 8 times bigger than negative 1. Now in the final example, let's say a 10% price increase causes only a 2% decrease in quantity demanded. Now the price elasticity of demand is negative 2% divided by 10%, which is negative 0.2. That's the smallest. So here a 10% price increase causes less than a 10% price decrease, and that's why the absolute value of this price elasticity of demand is less than 1. So the bigger the absolute value of the price elasticity of demand, the more responsive quantity demanded is to a change in price. So we can categorize price elasticity of demands for various products. If the absolute value of the price elasticity of demand is less than 1, then the price elasticity of demand is characterized as inelastic. Inelastic, non-responsive. This just means a percent change in price causes less than an equal but in opposite direction changes in quantity demanded. If the price elasticity of demand in absolute value is equal to 1, then we call elasticity, we say it's unit elastic. That means a percent change in price causes an equal but opposite percent change in quantity demanded. And finally, if the absolute value of the price elasticity of demand is greater than 1, then the good is defined as having elastic demand, elastic being responsive. If it's elastic demand, then a certain percent change in price will cause a greater, in opposite direction, percent change in quantity demanded. Let's derive something practical from what we've learned. Let's imagine a company is considering raising the price of its product, and the company happens to know its price elasticity of demand. You know when you go to the supermarket and they want you to use those loyalty cards? What they're doing is they're keeping track of what you're buying, and sometimes they might change the price for a few hours just to see how that affects demand. So companies are gathering massive amounts of data, in part to find out how elastic their products are. So let's say this company, they're thinking about raising their price. They know the price elasticity of demand for their product. Should they be more willing to raise price if the demand for their product is elastic or inelastic? Why don't you pause the video and think of the answer before I tell you what I think the answer is. Okay, well, let's consider both cases. Now, if demand is elastic, that means that quantity demanded is very responsive to a change in price. So if you raise the price of a good and demand is elastic, a lot fewer people will buy the good. And if you raise the price of a product, right, a good thing and a bad thing happen from the point of view of the company. The good thing is you get more money for every product sold. The bad thing is that you'll sell less product. If demand is very elastic, then when you raise the price of a good, you get a lot of the bad thing. You get a lot of the people saying, oh, we're not going to buy this good. You can always take this to an extreme. Let's say demand is super elastic. You raise the price by a penny, no one buys it anymore. Well, you really don't want to raise the price by a penny. Now, in contrast, if demand is inelastic, when you raise price, you get a good thing because you get more money for every product sold, but relatively few customers will no longer buy your product. So that should make you relatively willing to raise the price of a good. In an extreme case, if demand was completely inelastic, demand was completely unresponsive to changes in price, yeah, you raise your price, you raise it to infinity. You're like, wait a minute, I mean, we could raise our price to $1 billion a unit, we'd sell just as many? Let's do it. In fact, let's go to $1 trillion a unit. So which of course tells you that the demand for no products can be completely inelastic. So again, when you raise the price of a good, you get a good thing if you're the company because you get more money per unit sold. But the bad thing is fewer customers want to buy your product. If demand is elastic, people are very responsive to changes in price, so you get a lot of the bad thing if you raise price. If demand is inelastic, you get relatively little of the bad thing if you raise price. Now let's consider the opposite case. A company is thinking of lowering its price. Should it be more willing to do this if the demand for its product is elastic or inelastic? Again, please try and think of the answer before you hear my answer. Okay, well, when you lower the price of a product, you're doing something bad for your company. You're going to get less money for every product sold. Very bad. But there's a good thing in that more customers, by the law of demand, will want to buy your product. So you should be more willing to lower the price if customers are very price sensitive, or if the demand for your product is very elastic. Because if customers are very price sensitive, you can imagine the company saying, all right, we're going to lower the price, we don't like that, but we cut the price by a little bit and we get a lot more customers, so it might be worth it. But if your demand for your product is price insensitive, or people have an inelastic demand for your product, then you lower the price and you don't gain that many more customers, so that probably seems like a bad deal for you. What determines the price elasticity of demand for a product? Well, lots of things. Let's consider a few. One is time. The longer the time frame, the greater the elasticity. So for example, let's imagine that Pepsi raises its price. It's probably going to take a while for customers to realize this. You go buy Pepsi at the supermarket, you put it in your shopping cart. Most of the time you don't look. But occasionally you will. And if Pepsi raises its price, eventually most customers will realize it. And then, they'll decide, oh, I better not consume Pepsi anymore. Or say a restaurant lowers its price. It's going to take a while for people to find that out, to find out the price has been lowered and, for it to cause them to then go check out the restaurant. Or maybe the price of oil goes up and that raises the price of gas. Well, in the short run, maybe, people can't do very much about it. You use gas to drive to work. But in the long run, when someone gets a new car, maybe they'll get a more fuel efficient car because the price of gas is higher. Or but when they buy a new house, they'll make sure they live closer to work because now the fuel costs of driving are much greater. So customers, the more time customers have to adjust, the more they will adjust. Now this can create some dangers for companies. If a company raises the price of its product and it's like, oh good, we didn't lose that many customers after a week, I guess it's okay. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's going to take a month for most of your customers to figure it out. It also means that companies that cut the price of their product, they've got to be patient. You cut the price of your product and you don't see that much of an increase in quantity demanded. Well, maybe it's going to take a while for customers to figure out what you've done. All right. Something else that can influence price elasticity of demand is the availability of substitutes. So let's first say that you really like cola, and Coke and Pepsi taste about the same to you. So let's say Pepsi sells for $1 and Coke is for 99 cents. You get Coke. But if Coke raises its price to $1.01, you'll jump to Pepsi. If Coke and Pepsi are excellent substitutes, and if there are other colas that are also good substitutes, you'll just go for the cheapest. That means if a company raises its price just a little bit above the others, you'll jump ship. You'll move to another product. It also means that if a company cuts its price, there's a lot of potential customers out there. So if a lot of people think all cola tastes about the same, then any cola company could say, all those people drinking the other colas, they're our potential customers because if we just charge the least, we'll attract them. Now, in contrast, let's imagine you love Coke and nothing really is a very good substitute for Coke. Everything else is kind of yuck to you compared to Coke. Well, Coke could raise its price by quite a bit before you jump. At some point you jump, but you wouldn't jump if it's just, a few pennies more expensive. Or take restaurants. There's a restaurant in your city and it raises its price. Well, if there's another restaurant right next to it that's pretty much just as good. If this restaurant gets a bit more expensive, you won't go there anymore. But if this restaurant is by far your best, nothing else quite is similar in your mind, well, you'll tolerate some greater increases in price. Or let's take pharmaceutical products. Let's say you're on a drug for your heart and you kind of need the drug to stay alive. You don't have insurance, you got to pay out of pocket for the drug. Well, if this is the only drug that will keep you alive, meaning there are no substitutes, you're going to spend a lot of money on it. I mean, eventually, if the price is high enough, you'll just die because you can't afford it. But certainly, if you can afford it and they keep increasing the price, you'll keep paying it. Now, in contrast, if you need medication for your heart, but there are 5 different medications that would all do equally well, there's 5 good substitutes for each other, well, if one gets too expensive, you'll jump to the others. And there could be an in-between case where, one medicine is the best, there's not a perfect substitute for it, but there's another medication that's almost as good. Maybe a slightly higher chance of dying, or you might get nauseous once a month. Well, you'll still, if they raise the price of the medicine you've been taking, you'll still take it, you'll tolerate it for a little while, but at some point you'll say, yeah, I'm willing to accept the slightly increased health risks of the not quite as good medication. So in general, the better substitutes there are for a product, the greater the price elasticity of demand for a product. This, by the way, explains why companies don't want you to think they're good substitutes for their product, because then it's harder for them to raise price. This explains a lot of the fashion world. This explains why people try to convince you, oh, our white shirt is different from everyone else's white shirt because of our great brand. So don't think that you can buy this other company's shirt that really is made of the same material and looks almost the same, because it's in fact a horrible substitute. Companies really, companies, especially ones that want to raise price, really don't want you to think that there are good substitutes for their product. To review, price elasticity of demand measures how responsive quantity demanded is to changes in price. By the law of demand, the price elasticity of demand is always going to be negative because changes in price and changes in quantity demanded move in opposite directions. If demand is elastic, that means a change in price will cause a greater, in percent terms, change in quantity demanded. If demand is inelastic, then a percent change in price will cause a lower, in absolute value sense, change in quantity demanded. Thank you for listening.